The most liberal Republican in Congress today is still ideologically to the right of the most conservative Democrat, reflecting the fact that moderate voters in each party are drifting further and further apart as well. But if winning elections is the only thing that matters, the two parties probably would not be so eager to rid themselves of centrist members. This is not always the case, but there is a lot of evidence that moderate candidates tend to perform better at the ballot box. And though the relationship may be growing weaker with time, an examination of split-ticket voting in the 2020 election suggests it is still there. Using data on the results of the presidential election by congressional district from Daily Kos elections, I calculated how much better or worse each candidate for U.S. House did than their party's presidential nominee. Assuming that President Biden and former President Donald Trump's vote share represent how a typical 2020 Democrat or Republican would have done in each district, this gap gives you a rough measure of candidate quality. As it turns out, the vast majority of House candidates performed about as you would expect based on presidential partisanship. But when you look at the exceptions, the districts where Democratic House candidates most outperformed Biden, and the districts where Republican candidates most outperformed Trump, the strongest candidates tended to be incumbents with moderate voting records and personal brands that differentiate them from the national reputation of their party. Let's start by looking at the 10 congressional districts where the Democratic House candidates outran Biden by the largest margins, excluding House seats that Republicans did not contest. Ultimately, former Representative Colin Peterson lost his seat to Republican Representative Michelle Fischbach last year. But by this metric, his 14-point loss was still the most impressive Democratic performance in the entire country, given that former President Donald Trump carried Minnesota's 7th district by 29 points. Peterson, the 15-term incumbent, managed to hold on to his reddening district so long thanks to his leadership on agricultural issues, a big deal in the rural 7th district and centrist reputation. He was a founding member of the Blue Dog Coalition, a caucus of moderate Democrats, and the only Democrat to vote against Trump's 2019 impeachment on both counts. Next on the list is Representative Henry Sweller. His anti-abortion, pro-gun views initially looked like they would hurt him in 2020, as he faced a serious primary challenge from progressive Jessica Cisneros. But it looks like Democrats were wise to renominate him, as his conservative streak probably helped him in the general election. He won re-election by 19 points in a district that Biden carried by just 4. And there are at least 3 more moderates in the top 10. Representative Ed Case, the third strongest Democratic candidate of 2020, who is the current co-chair of the Blue Dog Coalition. Additionally, 5th-ranking Representative Jared Golden, who is by one common measure of ideology the most conservative Democrat left in the House. He was also recently the only House Democrat to vote against Biden's COVID-19 stimulus bill and background checks for gun sales. And finally, former Representative Anthony Brindisi's moderate voting record is also likely the reason he was so competitive for re-election last year in his Trump plus 11 district. Although, after a court battle over his razor-close election, he eventually conceded his 109-vote loss. Moving on, it was not just Democratic moderates who outperformed their presidential nominee. Middle-of-the-road incumbents also represent many of the districts where Republican House candidates most improved upon Trump's margins, again excluding House seats that Democrats did not contest. Near the top are Representatives John Katko and Brian Fitzpatrick, who after the 2018 blue wave were 2 of the only 3 House Republicans representing districts carried by Hillary Clinton, indicative of significant crossover appeal. And indeed, both won re-election by double digits in 2020, even as Biden carried their districts by 6 to 9 points. Fitzpatrick likely benefits from his family's long history of centrist leadership, and Katko has also set himself apart from the more extreme elements of the national GOP by voting to impeach Trump for his role in the Capitol insurrection and to strip Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of her committee assignments. Then, 2 other pro-impeachment Republicans, Representatives Dan Newhouse and Adam Kinzinger, who has been especially vocal about standing up to Trump, also make the top 10, and a few others, Representatives Anthony Gonzalez, David Valadao, and Fred Upton, just missed the cut. But there are 2 districts on the list that are not like the others, the Minnesota 5th and Maryland 7th, and that is because they actually have Democratic incumbents. It is quite a feat for a challenger with no political experience to be a stronger candidate than several longtime incumbents with established brands, but Lacey Johnson and Kim Klacik achieved it, probably thanks in large part due to the massive amounts of money they raised and spent. Also, aided by national Republican hatred toward his opponent, Representative Ilhan Omar, Johnson raised a whopping $12.2 million. And Klacik outraised her opponent, Democratic Representative Kwesi Mafum, $8.3 million to $1 million, which is arguably more impressive than Johnson because Mafum does not have the same national profile as Omar. But that being said, a lot of Klacik's and Johnson's apparent strengths may be more about their opponent's weaknesses. Before his current stint in Congress, Mafum faced allegations of sexual harassment. And while Johnson's vote share was 8 points higher than Trump's 26% of the total vote versus 18%, Ilhan Omar's vote share was a whopping 16 points lower than Biden's 64% versus 80%, suggesting the gap in Minnesota's 5th district is more about Omar losing votes than Johnson gaining them. Once again, this could be due to political ideology. One of the most progressive members of Congress, Omar is nationally famous and notorious as a member of the Squad. According to a late January poll conducted by YouGov and The Economist, 40% of Americans have an unfavorable opinion of her, while only 27% have a favorable opinion of her. On the other hand, other notable progressives such as Representatives Cori Bush, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Rashida Tlaib did not significantly underperform Biden in their districts. And a lot, although not all of the votes Omar lost, probably went to legal marijuana now candidate Michael Moore, who was extremely progressive himself. But there are some other factors that could explain some of her underperformance as well, perhaps the most significant of which being xenophobia. Omar was born in Somalia and is one of only 3 Muslim members of Congress, and many of Johnson's attacks on her had racist undertones. So in other words, political ideology is not the only determinant of a candidate's quality. Other factors such as fundraising ability, scandal, and opponent quality matter too. And there were some more radical candidates who proved to be very strong candidates as well. Republican Representative Garrett Graves, who won by 16 more percentage points than Trump did in Louisiana's 6th district, was one of the 147 Republicans who objected to certifying the results of the 2020 election. And Democratic Representative Sylvia Garcia, whose margin in Texas's 29th district exceeded Biden's by 11 points, has, by one measure, the most progressive voting record in the House. But overall, the strongest House candidates of 2020 were disproportionately moderate. That is all for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed. Please make sure to follow my personal Instagram and EP Official on all social media shown on screen and linked in the description down below. Also, make sure to comment your thoughts and opinions in the comment section, and please hit the like button if you liked the video as well. Subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you all so much for watching. Check out more content from my channel here, and as always, tune in next time. EP out.